Hello, I'm George Anders, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. It's been a tight housing market since the pandemic hit. City workers swarmed to the suburbs, causing home demand to rise along with prices. But as inventory decreased, so did sales, falling nearly 21% earlier this year. Today, we're digging into next year's real estate landscape and how to prepare for it. Joining me now is Danielle Hale. She is the chief economist at Realtor.com. Prior to that, she was the managing director of housing research at the National Association of Realtors for almost a decade. She has her master's and undergraduate degree from Florida State University. Danielle, welcome.
Thanks for having me, George.
So we're going to talk all real estate today, but we're going to take a broad look at it. And let's start with where we are right now in the U.S. housing market. What are you seeing in terms of trends? How did we get here? Where are we going?
Yeah, I think when people are asking where we are in the housing market, the big variable that they often want to know about is home prices, because that's what impacts them. If they're a buyer, it's sort of this goal and also a big hurdle in some cases. And if you own a home already, it's a key component of your net worth. So a lot of value for a lot of households is tied up in their home. So house prices and where they're ending the year, the answer is they're up, but at a much slower pace than we saw earlier this year. So our October housing trends report showed that median list prices were up 8.6% on a year-over-year basis. And that's moving higher, but half as fast as they were growing in the spring. In April, home prices were up 17.2% on a year-over-year basis. So home prices are rising, but not nearly as quickly as they were earlier in the year in the spring when the housing market is most competitive. If we think about the price level itself and not just the pace at which it's growing, the price level itself in October was $380,000 for the median home listing, which is very close to the record highs that we saw in the summer. And there's a seasonal pattern in home prices. We typically see prices rise in the summer when the types of homes that are selling are bigger and more family oriented, and then prices cool off a little bit as we move into the fall. The peak this year in 2021 was $385,000 for the median list price, and we're down just slightly from that in October. So prices remain quite high.
So that gives us a great sense of the big picture. Let's bring it down now very granularly. If I'm a person who's got a home to sell, or even more immediately, if I'm looking to buy a home, we've just come through this whole pandemic with work at home becoming much more of a norm. How's that affected what people think their dream house has got to be? And I'm thinking in terms of home work areas, studies, internet connections. Well, what do you see changing in that picture?
Yeah, I think one of the big surprises is that a lot has changed, and then some other things are really constant. So 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes are still the most in-demand homes, and that's been pretty consistent. Garages, updated kitchens and bathrooms, a quiet location, and large backyards all still top the list of must-haves. That said, there are signs of the way the pandemic has changed how we live, how we work, and we do see that people are looking for flexibility and versatility. So things like space for pets, broadband availability, extra space in general that they can sort of figure out what to do with have grown in importance. But despite these huge changes, there's still a lot of consistency in what people want in a home.
So when you say the 3-bedroom home is still the standard, what does that translate into square feet?
Oh, as far as square footage, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's typically around 2,000 square feet. So plus or minus a little bit there, but right around 2,000 square feet.
Okay, so we haven't gone totally mansion crazy. It's not, all the 3,000 and 5,000s.
No McMansions at the median.
So one of the other things I wonder about, and I'm in California, so we have climate issues almost all the time and concerned about how much rainfall there's going to be. Are you seeing people thinking differently about how they want to landscape their homes? Is the sustainability coming into the mix in terms of what your water needs are going to be? Or is that just a handful of people and the rest of the country isn't really going there?
Oh, interesting. So we haven't looked at landscaping specifically, but when it comes to climate change, people are thinking about it, particularly when it comes to how natural disasters are affecting real estate and homeownership. People are growing more concerned. And while 62% of all homeowners reported being concerned about natural disasters, it's even higher among younger buyers and millennials and recent home buyers. As many as 75% of recent home buyers are thinking about natural disasters and what that might mean for them and home ownership. And when we say natural disasters, it's a broad spectrum, everything from tornadoes to snowstorms to hurricanes to floods to fires. So a lot of different types of things that people are taking into consideration. One of the ways I think we're making it easier for people to take this information into account at Realtor.com is by making flood information available. So we've got FEMA flood risk zones. We've also partnered with the First Street Foundation to provide their flood factor, which is a property level assessment of the flooding risk over the next 30 years. So you have an idea of what your risk might look like over the course of the typical mortgage term if you were to buy a property. And I think that's really useful information for buyers and can help get them to have that conversation and think about what these big picture macro changes might mean for them on the individual level.
Terrific. I want to take a moment to say hello to some people from the stream. Hello to Leonard from Albania. Hello to Nicole from San Francisco. And hello to Dennis from Chicago. And we've already got a really interesting question coming in from people watching us. This comes from Nicholas, and he says, I bought a house in March. It was insane. I had to make 30 plus offers before we got a place, and our offer was 11% over list. Is this a rarity, or is this the world we're all living in now?
So in today's housing market, that is actually not that exceptional. It is true that a lot of buyers have to put in multiple offers before they find one that's successful, and they're often offering above asking price. That's essentially what sellers expect in this market, and those expectations are driven by the fact that that's what they experience. They're often seeing multiple offers for each home listing. Now, as we move into the next year, and even actually as we've moved into the fall, the real estate market tends to grow somewhat less competitive in the fall. That doesn't mean multiple offers are gone in this market by any stretch, but instead of being one of 11 offers, which I think is what Nick said, instead of being one of 11, he might only be one of 2 or 3 other offers. So there are fewer buyers potentially to compete with, but it's still a competitive situation. So that can make for a lot of frustration, a lot of success, I'm sure, if you're successful, as it sounds like Nicholas was. But it can be a challenging market. And so I think for buyers approaching this market, being prepared and understanding kind of what they're getting into is really key.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about price and the fact that often you have to bid above asking to get it. There's time compression too. I mean, a lot of homes, particularly the nice ones, do not stay on the market for long. And I'd be interested in any data you have about how long homes are taking to sell. And then maybe some thoughts if you're a buyer, how do you work in this world where you can't say, can I come back next weekend?
Yeah, so you're right. Homes are selling faster. In fact, our October data, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. So there is this seasonal pattern that we see in the housing market. It's fairly predictable every year. The spring is the most competitive. That's when we have the most buyers out. A lot of sellers come to the market in spring and early summer. And that's when prices tend to rise and the speed on the market tends to move fastest. So homes usually sell fastest in the June, July timeframe. It's usually when prices peak. And then as we move into the fall, prices cool off a bit, home sales slow. What's interesting is that this year, in October, homes are selling faster in October of 2021 than they sold in the fastest month in any previous year. So for context, they're selling a little bit slower now than they did in June and July of this year, but they're still selling faster than the fastest month in 2020, 2019, 2018, et cetera. So it's still a very fast-moving real estate market. I think some of the reasons it's a fast-moving real estate market are good reasons. People are adopting more technology to help them find homes that are a good fit for them faster than ever before. And so that's a good thing. It's saving people time in the home search. At the same time, if you're a buyer in today's market, it means you need to act really quickly. And so you want to be prepared before you even start shopping. Think about your budget. Think about what you're comfortable with, not just what an online calculator will tell you can afford. Start with that as an information guide and use the calculator, but then make sure that those numbers are really going to work for you and your budget. And think about what you want to have, what you're willing to give up in order to get into a home, because as we've talked about, the market is competitive. So being able to be flexible on some of your must-haves is a good way to make sure that you can find a home that fits in your budget.
So we've got some questions from several members, from Marley and Scott, wanting to know if they should wait to buy. And I can understand the feeling of everything's cresting, maybe it'll be cheaper in a bit. And what would your advice be on that, and how long should they wait?
Yeah, so I think waiting to buy is such a, a lot of people want to think about that because if you can time the market and buy when prices are low, that's what you want to do. That's a good for yourself. That said, market timing is next to impossible in the housing market, just like it's next to impossible in the stock market. So I would say if you're ready and you know what your budget is, you know what your comfort factor is, you know what you're looking for in a home, start searching for it. And when you find something that meets your criteria, I would say go for it. There are actually studies that show that people who bought their homes sooner when they're younger actually end up with a higher net worth later in life. And a lot of that has to do with starting to build up equity earlier in the process. And so that that can get you to a better place later on in life.
I think we've actually got a graphic that shows how home prices have moved in 2020, this year, and then a prediction for 2022. And that speaks to exactly what you were saying. I mean, it's at least for now, we're seeing a lot of growth, and the people who bought earlier are probably a step earlier, a step farther along in terms of building up their net worth. Challenging times. And one more challenge I want to get your thoughts on. We're starting to see inflation coming back into the US economy. And some of that has got to involve building materials, and we're also seeing supply shortages. How are those two macro trends affecting the world of real estate?
Yeah, great question. So rising inflation kind of impacts the housing market in a lot of different ways. It can raise the cost of building, which can raise home prices, which has the effect of then pushing up home prices even for existing homes that don't necessarily need to be built, but because they're competitive with new homes. So we tend to see higher home prices when we see inflation. So for that reason, a lot of people think about real estate as a good hedge against inflation. Once you own a home, you're not necessarily seeing increased costs just because the price of your home is rising. So that can interest a lot of people in the housing market. At the same time, there are factors that inflation brings that can make it difficult for buyers to get in. Rising prices mean higher down payments, higher monthly costs. They're often coupled with rising interest rates, including mortgage rates, which can mean higher monthly costs for potential buyers. And with those rising costs of materials, especially in the new home side of things, it can make it difficult for builders to complete homes. And that's something that really interesting that we're seeing with new home supply now, is that a lot of the homes that are for sale from builders are actually not even started yet or are still under construction. And that's a bit unusual. There are some completed homes that are for sale, but a much smaller share now than we would typically see, which means for a lot of buyers, new homes might not be a great substitute unless you're able to wait for a home. So if you're in the market and you need to close on a home quickly, you might have to consider an existing home just because you might not find new homes that are really move-in ready.
So instead of developing an opinion on how the kitchen counters look, you've got to take it as an act of faith that there will be kitchen counters. You're buying it when you're still looking at wooden slats and studs and joists.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose on the plus side, you might get to weigh in and might get to pick out some of what you're looking for. Though, if it's like buying a car, which I've done recently, you're kind of stuck with what's on the lot, and it's not much.
Okay, so now you semi get a customized house if you have a different thought about what you want your appliances to be or what colors you want the walls painted. You can enter the conversation before the paint shows up.
Yes, absolutely.
How do things look for sellers? I mean, obviously, this is a great time to be selling. What are their expectations? Are any of them getting too greedy? Share your thoughts on that question.
I think the market will tell if sellers are getting too greedy, but we know that sellers' expectations are high, and as they should be. It is a seller's market. It is very competitive in real estate right now, and it's not just the numbers that tell us that. It seems that consumers are getting that message, or homeowners are getting that message. Surveys of sellers show that they know it's a good time to sell. That said, I think it's interesting. The number one reason that homeowners say they're not selling right now is because they can't find a home they like in their price range for them to go to. So this inventory challenge that we're experiencing is affecting not only the buy side of the market, but also the sell side of the market, because so many sellers turn around and buy another home to live in. So it's almost like housing is in this catch-22. And that's one of the reasons why new construction is going to be key for getting us out of the situation, because obviously new homes don't have an existing homeowner that needs to sell and find somewhere else to go. So that's one way we can really add net inventory to the market. And the shortage that we're experiencing right now has really been a long time in forming. If we compare household formations over the last decade with single family home construction, we find that we've had 5.2 million more households formed than single family homes built. It's a pretty big hole to dig out of, especially when you consider we only have about 1 million single family homes started each year. So it's essentially a 5-year deficit that we need to work through in the housing market.
Wow. So does that force a lot of people to be renters, even though they would like to be buyers? Or everyone's got to live somewhere. And if they can't live in a new home that never got built, where are they going to live?
Yeah, so you've got renters, you've got probably some households that are still like together instead of splitting out, young adults that maybe still live with their parents instead of starting off on their own. So, because vacancy rates for both homeowners and for rental vacancy are actually quite low. So, the housing shortage is perhaps most acute in the buying side of things, but it is also an issue on the rental side of the market. And that's one of the reasons why we've seen rents really start to pick up in recent months, and they're growing at double digits as well.
So we've got a couple more comments from the stream. Gagan wants to know, he says, I've been in the market for 3 months now and almost all the houses are going way above the list price. Is there a correction in pricing in sight? You actually addressed that pretty well with your thoughts about timing the market, but it's probably worth reiterating for someone like that who really would like to buy. What would you tell them to be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think list price is just one piece of the conversation. And so when homes are selling above list price, that can be really frustrating because you feel like you're seeing one price and then it's going out the door at a different price. And while we may see some compression between listing prices and selling prices, so the gap between them may get smaller, on average, we still expect home prices to continue rising. So that would suggest that as a buyer, you're better off getting in sooner rather than later if you can find a home that's right for you. And on top of that, I will add that mortgage rates are expected to continue gradually increasing as they've already started to do in recent weeks. And so with lower mortgage rates, that's a lower monthly payment. You're again better off getting in sooner where you can take advantage of those lower mortgage rates rather than waiting. I know that's easier said than done because it is a competitive housing market, but I would advise you to be persistent and be quick. Set up a listing alert so that you can know as soon as a home hits the market in your criteria. You can do that on real estate sites like realtor.com. And that way you can be fast and give yourself better odds of success in this market.
So that's a really interesting point, that if you're trying to get the house price exactly right, you've got this whole second equation of what your mortgage is. And a house that's a tiny bit cheaper at a 4% interest rate is not really going to be easier on your wallet than today's house at a 3% interest rate.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think a lot of buyers forget to consider how very small changes in the mortgage rate can add up to big dollars when you're making this payment every month. So over the course of a year or over the course of 30 years, which is when you're typically holding the mortgage for. A mortgage calculator, and we've got one of those at realtor.com, mortgage calculator can really help you run the numbers and understand just how much those movements in mortgage rates can affect your monthly budget.
So we've been talking so far about U.S. housing as if it was sort of an aggregate across the whole country, but this is a very regional country. Each region is its own story. What are you seeing in terms of parts of the country where home prices are going up the fastest, and then maybe ones where their prices are still a little more reasonable if you're a buyer?
Yeah, so prices tend to be highest in big cities and especially on the coast. So that's where price levels are high. When it comes to where they're increasing the most, it's generally the South and the West. So areas like Austin, Phoenix, Las Vegas, that's where we've seen the biggest price run-ups in recent years. We've seen slower price growth in parts of the Midwest and Northeast, sort of outside of the big cities, areas like Detroit, where we just don't have the same level of competitiveness. And so home prices haven't run up nearly as much. And I think the interesting thing about that, we often talk about all of these different markets, but with the flexibility that people have to work more remotely or more flexibly, a lot of people are considering relocating. And interestingly, our survey data suggests that one of the number one reasons to consider moving is to try to get lower housing costs. And there definitely is a lot of variety in the price of housing across different markets in the US.
No, that's great. In fact, I want to stay on that notion of people are considering moves to get the house they want at the price they can abide. We've got a lot of people switching jobs, and we at LinkedIn here write a lot about the great reshuffle as people are moving out of jobs that perhaps aren't right for them and looking for something different. We've got really high rates of job quits these days. How do you see that playing into the way the real estate market sorts out? Do people leave those high cost places and move closer to the center of the country, or do people just leave a job in a high cost area and want to stay in the same high cost area?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of it depends on life stage and what they're looking for. If they're looking for settling down and maybe starting a family, trying to establish some equity and build up some equity for themselves, become a homeowner, that's where it makes sense to move to one of those more affordable areas. If you're still young, you're trying to establish yourself in your career, maybe you haven't met your life partner yet. Some of those things are easier to do in big cities. And so I don't think big cities are going to, completely fall off the map. I think they still are desirable for a lot of people at certain stages of their lives. That said, the flexibility that workers have today to relocate is going to enable some people to make their dreams of homeownership come true a bit sooner than they otherwise would have. They don't have to commute into an office, 5 days a week if they're only doing that 1 to 2 times a week. That means maybe they can stomach a little bit longer commute. And we know that home prices, as you move further away from downtowns, generally fall, if not absolutely, at least on a per square foot basis. You can get a little bit more space and more affordability as you move out towards the suburbs. And I think that's really going to help, especially when mortgage rates are starting to tick up. We already know home prices are high. That's a way that people can still find their way to become homeowners.
Well, this is great. We started out talking about real estate, and we've managed to cover everything from kitchen counters to finding your life partner. It's been a pleasure having Danielle Hale as our guest. She is chief economist at realtor.com. Thanks so much for being part of our show.
Happy to join. Thanks for having me, George.
And I want to say especially a big thank you to our viewers for your comments and questions. We got a lot of great questions on the stream, and I did my best to bring them all into the conversation. You can continue the conversation or check out other stories to the right of your feed, or if you're in mobile, click on the search box. LinkedIn News Live will be back with you in December. We'll have more awesome shows about all things related to work life, career, business, and industry. We look forward to seeing you then. I'm George Anders. Thanks for watching LinkedIn News Live today, and have a happy Thanksgiving.